uncharted ship in the middle of the ocean in just 30 minutes. No boat, no life jacket, and not a single trace on the security cameras. On March 24th, 1998, Amy Lynn Bradley did exactly that. Or rather, someone made sure she did. To understand the horror of that night, you first have to imagine the darkness outside the railing of a cruise ship. Out there, in the open Caribbean Sea, the water isn't blue. It's an absolute, impenetrable black abyss, a void that doesn't return an echo. The Rhapsody of the Seas was a floating city of 2,000 people, glowing with the artificial lights of casinos and the echoes of laughter. Within those steel walls, you feel safe. You feel untouchable. But for Amy Bradley, this fortress was slowly becoming a trap. Amy was 23 years old. She was a gifted swimmer, a recent college graduate with a bright, unfolding future. This cruise was supposed to be a celebration, a gift the family gave to themselves. 4 days of turquoise waves and Caribbean sun. But from the moment they stepped onto the gangway, the air felt different. The Bradley family began to notice it almost immediately. The stares. It wasn't the kind of attention a beautiful young woman usually attracts. It was something colder. Crew members and professional musicians from the ship's band, Blue Orchid, watched her with a chilling, predatory appraisal. It was as if they weren't looking at a passenger, but at a prize. On that final night, the ship was alive with music. Amy had been out dancing, trying to enjoy the last leg of their vacation. But as the clock ticked toward the early morning hours, the atmosphere shifted. Around 5 in the morning, the air was heavy and humid. Amy went out onto the cabin balcony with her father, Ron. They shared a few quiet words in the pre-dawn stillness. The ship was silent, except for the distant, rhythmic thrum of the massive engines below. Ron, tired from the long night, dozed off in a deck chair. Amy lay down on the lounge chair beside him. Only 30 minutes passed. When Ron woke up at 5:30 a.m., the lounge chair was empty. The balcony door was slightly ajar, swaying with the movement of the ship. He looked inside the cabin. Her cigarettes were there. Her lighter was there. Even her shoes were still sitting by the bed. Everything Amy needed to navigate the world was left behind. But Amy herself had dissolved into the salt air. As the Rhapsody of the Seas prepared to dock in the port of Curaçao, thousands of people were waking up, eager to see the colorful Dutch houses on the shore. They had no idea that somewhere in the steel labyrinth of that ship, a nightmare had begun, one that remains unsolved to this day. And as we dig deeper into the shadows of this ship, we find that the ocean was only the beginning of Amy's story. As the clock struck 6 and the sun began to bleed over the horizon of the Caribbean, the search for Amy Bradley turned into a silent, desperate race against time. The Rhapsody of the Seas was approaching the port of Curaçao, a vibrant island known for its colorful Dutch architecture. But while the Bradley family scoured the upper decks, breathless and trembling, a much darker narrative was starting to emerge from the shadows of the night before. On a ship with 2,000 strangers, Amy wasn't just another face in the crowd. She had become a target. The primary focus of this unwanted attention was a man known to the crew simply as Yellow. His real name was Alistair Douglas, the bass player for the band Blue Orchid. Witnesses would later testify that Yellow hadn't just noticed Amy. He seemed fixated on her from the very first day. Earlier that night, they were seen at the ship's disco. To a casual observer, it might have looked like a typical cruise ship encounter, a beautiful guest and a charming musician. But those close to Amy saw something that made their skin crawl. There was a predator and prey dynamic that made the air feel heavy. Yellow had been seen buying her drinks, leaning in too close, his eyes never leaving her face, even when she tried to look away. But it wasn't just the musician. The atmosphere on the ship had crossed a line into something far more sinister. A waiter had approached the family earlier in the trip, looking her father in the eye and asking if he could take Amy out on the town once they docked. It felt less like an invitation and more like a proposal for a transaction. When Amy heard this, she didn't feel flattered. She felt hunted. She turned to her mother and said words that would haunt the family forever. "I don't want to go out there. Those people, they creep me out." By 5:30 a.m., just minutes before she vanished, a crew member claimed to see Amy in the elevator with Yellow. He said they were heading toward the upper decks, far from her family's cabin. If this is true, Alistair "Yellow" Douglas was the last person to see Amy Bradley alive. Yet, when questioned by the FBI, his story was as smooth as his music. He claimed he said goodnight and went to his cabin. But there is a detail that remains burned into the memory of the Bradleys. When the search began, Yellow was seen leaning against a railing, watching the chaos with a terrifying indifference. He didn't look like a man who had lost a friend. He looked like a man who had successfully finished a job. By 10:30 a.m., the Rhapsody of the Seas was no longer a sanctuary of luxury. It had become a cold, steel labyrinth. As the massive ship finally nudged against the concrete docks of Curaçao, the Bradley family wasn't looking at the colorful Dutch houses on the shore. They were screaming Amy's name into the industrial hum of the lower decks, their voices cracking with a terror that no one seemed to share. But as their panic reached a breaking point, they encountered something far more chilling than the ocean: a wall of silence from the cruise line. In any disappearance, the first hour is the most critical. Every second is a second where a trail goes cold. Yet, when Ron and Eva Bradley begged the ship's security to make a simple announcement, to wake the passengers and ask them to look for a girl in a blue sarong, they were met with a firm, corporate refusal. The company didn't want to disturb the peace. They didn't want to ruin the vacation atmosphere. While Amy might have still been within reach on board, the ship operated with terrifying efficiency. People went to breakfast. They lined up at the gangways. They laughed as they walked off the ship into the chaotic crowds of Curaçao. And in that flood of thousands of people, the window to find Amy was slammed shut. Then came the moment that would haunt Ron and Eva forever. The ship's engines roared. The schedule had to be kept. Faced with an impossible choice, the Bradleys did the only thing they could. They gathered their bags and stepped off the ship. As the Rhapsody sailed away toward the horizon, taking any clues and witnesses with it, the family stood small and alone on the concrete pier. They were stranded in a foreign country, watching their only link to Amy disappear into the blue. Left to haunt the streets of Willemstad, they began their own investigation. But they soon discovered that while they were looking for Amy, the cruise line had been looking for order. When the FBI finally stepped in, they found that the Bradleys' cabin had been professionally scrubbed. The balcony, the railings, the floors, everything had been wiped clean with industrial chemicals. Any fingerprints or stray hairs were gone, erased by a cleaning crew following a routine that prioritized aesthetics over justice. Why the rush to clean a potential crime scene? Was it corporate policy or something more calculated? Rumors among the crew spoke of a legal gray zone in international waters, where the company acts as the police, the judge, and the jury. As the sun climbed higher, A local witness approached the family in a seaside cafe. She spoke of a girl, two men, and a frantic, silent plea for help. It was the first sign that Amy hadn't fallen into the sea. She had been taken, and the nightmare on the island was just beginning. While the cruise line was busy scrubbing cabins and maintaining their schedule, the world outside the ship began to whisper. For years, the Bradley family lived in a state of suspended grief, caught between the fragile hope that Amy was alive and the visceral horror of what that life might actually look like. And then, the sightings began. The first credible lead that truly chilled the investigators came from a member of the Canadian Navy. In 1999, he was visiting a local establishment on the island when a young woman approached him in the dim light. He described her as having the exact distinctive tattoos as Amy Bradley, a Tasmanian devil on her shoulder and a small lizard on her navel. She didn't smile. She didn't try to sell him anything. She looked at him with pleading, hollow eyes and whispered, "My name is Amy Bradley. Please help me." But the sailor, terrified of a confrontation with the powerful, armed men guarding the house, failed to act in that moment. By the time he found the courage to report the incident months later, the house was empty. The girl, and any trace of her, had vanished once again. It was as if Amy was being moved like a ghost through the dark underworld of the Caribbean, always one step ahead of the light. In 2005, a new piece of evidence shattered the family's fragile peace once more. An anonymous tip led them to a website for adult services. There, among hundreds of grainy clinical images, was a photograph of a woman lying on a bed. She went by the professional name Jazz. When the Bradleys saw the photo, the air left the room. The bone structure, the arched eyebrows, the haunting, distant expression in those eyes. It was Amy, or a terrifyingly perfect double. FBI facial recognition experts were called in to analyze every pixel, comparing the image to Amy's old family photos. Their conclusion was staggering. The odds of this being anyone else were statistically impossible. But Jazz was never found. The website vanished into the shadows of the dark web shortly after, leaving behind nothing but a digital ghost. Every time a witness came forward, a tourist in a restroom, a sailor in a distant port, the result was always the same. A sudden disappearance, just minutes before help could arrive. It was as if a shadow was following her, keeping her just out of reach from the people who loved her, turning a living woman into a permanent mystery. Today, nearly 30 years after that humid March morning, the case of Amy Lynn Bradley remains one of the most haunting enigmas in maritime history. The Rhapsody of the Seas has been renamed and repainted many times since 1998. But for the Bradley family, time stands still. They never stopped looking. They spent their life savings on private investigators, traveled to the darkest corners of the Caribbean, and kept Amy's story alive in every major news outlet. To this day, the FBI offers a $25,000 reward for information leading to her return. They don't want closure. They want Amy. But what really happened in those 30 minutes on the balcony? Was it a crime of opportunity by a crew that knew the legal shadows of international waters too well? Or was Amy targeted long before she even stepped onto the gangway? The ocean is vast, and it is expert at keeping secrets. But the theories that haunt us the most are not the ones involving the deep, cold water. It's the possibility that Amy was, and perhaps still is, alive. A captive of a world that exists just beneath the surface of our own. A world that the cruise industry, with its bright lights and polished decks, would rather we didn't think about. As you look at the last known photo of Amy, smiling in the Caribbean sun, ask yourself, how can a person simply evaporate? And if it happened to her, on a ship full of people, what does it mean for the rest of us when the shore disappears from view? Leave a comment below with your theory. Was it the musician Yellow? Was it a coordinated kidnapping? Or does the ocean hold the only answer? Don't forget to subscribe to help us keep these stories alive, because as long as we remember them, they are never truly lost.